All right, folks. Hopefully you had a chance to take a quick break. We're going to move on with the rest of our program from 11:30 to 11:55. Brian Whipker again from NC State University. He's going to be talking to us about anti-GAs, PGRs, and how they work. Again, just some housekeeping items. If you want the handouts, you can download them from the Materials tab in the Go to Training Control panel. Please type in your questions on the chat window there in the same control panel, and I'll moderate those questions at the end of the session. We are recording this, so you will have access to view this after the fact if you've missed part of it or you want to review something again. And last but certainly not least, we want to thank Fine Americas for their sponsorship of this webinar. Sponsorship like this really makes it available to have these webinars brought to you free of charge. So without any further delay, Brian, I will let you take it away. Brian, are you there?
That better?
That's better.
Better? I'm pushing the wrong end of the button on voice, so I'm opposite. I guess I should be down in Australia, so I'm be down under. So okay, so in this next section, we're going to concentrate on looking at some of the chemicals that are out there and going over a little more depth of how they work and where some of the great applications for their use. So with that, we're going to our goal is to look at knowing what these tools are and how to use them effectively with production. So what are we talking about? I'm going to talk about the growth controllers, acetamidol, chlormequat, dimenazide, fluoroperimidol, Paclo, and uniconazole. Joyce Latimer in the next section, the next half an hour presentation, is going to talk about the structural enhancers. She's going to talk about Agio, Configure, Ethafon, and the GABA combinations that are out there. So again, the list that I'm talking about is the blue portion on the top, whereas Joyce is going to talk about the section of chemicals that are at the bottom. So we'll go over each one of these. So as far as growth controllers are concerned, there's a number of them that are there. These are primarily going to be the anti-GA ones that I discussed earlier. And we'll start with alphabetically acetamidol. And so acetamidol is a product that's been on the market for a while. ARES was introduced by CPRO, and then Fine introduced Abide a few years ago. And it's a pretty low percentage AI. It's less than 0.3%. And so it's known as a softer PGR, and but it has some good activity. So it's great niche. One of the best uses is really going to be down in plugs. So you get the safety factor there. It has the advantage that it has substrate activity, whereas dimenazide does not. And it also has the advantage that there's not the potential for the phytotoxicity, the yellowing that occurs with the chlormequat. So it has some nice niches there, especially for plugs. And this is an ad that was run in 2000 by CPRO, and I've always liked it. And for the talk, I had to go back through a lot of magazines to find this. And I love it. Plug in, or plug growers, plug in ARES, so you can have a low dose chemical that's very effective and not worry about sleeping by going with an overdose. So it's a very nice product for specifically for that use. Some of the application rates that are out there for bedding plant plugs, a low dose Sprint, that's a little higher volume of water because you're going to get the leaf activity and some root activity at a rate of 2 to 10 part per million. The sprays, the drenches, and the liner soak rates are all there. And so there's some nice niches that are out there that it's being used on, but plugs by far is one of its premier areas that it works. So like with all the most of the PGRs, anything that you can do to try to avoid quick dry down because of uptake through the leaf, you would like to have the humidity a little higher, like 4 hours, so it enhances uptake. So If you have high light conditions, you're going and it's dry, the middle of the day, for instance, you're going to dry very quickly, and you're not going to have as much uptake. So doing it the morning or late evening would be a preferred time to do it. And for most of these PGRs, that practice is going to improve uptake of that chemical. So another great use, especially in the southeast, is a fall pansy rate of about 15 part per million. Some people on some cultivars might use a little lower of about 10. It has been historically used for Easter lilies, but for the most part, a Unicon azole foliar spray is what's used by the industry. And there are some other bulb crops that works very well, and if you go look at the label, that will give you the detail on that crop. Here's some work by Joyce Latimer, so you can see with a bi-drenches, as you increase the rate, you got an increased amount of control with those plants. So, you know, it works. It has some nice niches, especially as a little tougher of a chemical when you look at that softer set of options for as a grower. So chlormequat, the next one that we're looking at, by far the two most popular materials there are the original Cyclacel from OHP and Citadel from Vine, and they're both 11.3% solution materials. It was a chemical that was produced quite a while ago, back in the 60s, and by far, you know, use on geraniums, poinsettias, hibiscus down in the south. It's a great product for foliar spray for an osteospermum, and so it doesn't have a long residual, 2 to 3 weeks. It depends on the crop. In the rates, you're looking at somewhere between 750 to 1,500 parts per million, and again, with a softer chemical, you have to apply it earlier, and then you might have to make multiple applications. It's primarily absorbed by the leaf, but you can also apply it as a drench. Now in Europe, there's a lot of drenches of Cyclacel made, or chlormequat made. But you got to take that with a grain of salt. Number one, they have a formulation over there that has a higher percentage AI. Number two, they don't have a lot of other chemicals available. So some cultural guides sometimes come across to the US, and the Europeans always say this many mils per liter, but watch out because their AIs are different than ours. So you need to go back and calculate it on a part per million basis. The unfortunate thing is the rates don't decrease. It's still a 2,000 to 3,000 part per million range for a drench. That's a pretty high density, high concentration material, and the European recommendations always say watch your EC because it's going to spike. So because of the cost in the US, the EC, it's really a drench application, while on the label it's not really something that's probably as economically feasible. A tank mix with diminizide, the rates are there, roughly a 3 to 1, is a great application to get synergy, especially with something like a poinsettia or a geranium, and that's why it's used quite extensively for those crops. Here's some works we did, and it was primarily a drench study, the bottom two with the top floor and a Sumagic. But what I want to point out in this part, because I'll talk about top floor later, is that even though the cost is higher, and that's the cost of the chemical, you know, a foliar spray is quicker to apply than a drench. But the quality of plants that you saw with Cyclacel, in this case on osteos, is outstanding. And so that to me, in my opinion, this is my opinion, as a spray of choice that you look at osteospermum. You get a little yellowing, the new growth does cover it up for what's going on. On the yellowing, one interesting thing to think about, that phytotoxicity that occurs, the lack of chlorophyll, usually happens when it's over 1,500 part per million. And if you look at the leaf, it doesn't happen to the old leaves that have fully expanded. The damage occurs on the leaves that are expanding. So after 2 weeks, of course, the new leaves that just started developing don't have it, and the oldest leaves don't either, just that one subset. And most plants have enough leaf material that covers it up, so you don't worry about it. But you always are going to look at the leaves that are finishing their expansion as where the damage occurs. So on chlormequat, I lost a slide there. for diminizide that went on. The transition slide took off on me here. But so the next chemical I want to talk about is diminizide. So we're looking at B9 for OHP is the original one that was introduced, and we also then have Dazide from Fine. It's also a short-term chemical, 2 to 3 weeks, relatively safe, but no soil activity, and it has probably one of the better leaf uptakes and redistributions within the plant of this group of PGRs. It does move out of the leaf to other growing points, so it is rapidly taken up by the plant and translocated. And it has a very wide crop range. I don't know why that slide got moved to the next spot, but there it is. So when you look at B9, here's Joyce Latimer's work also. You can compare the control with 2 SUMagic rates and then the B9 application that was made 3 times, and you can see some comparable control. So if you want something small or not as quite as active, that would work, and it might be, and it probably something when you look further north where you have less growth issues as us compared in the south, that might be an option you want to end up considering. I already talked a little about tank mixes. You get the activity of both, that synergistic effect, 1 + 1 giving 3 parts of control. You will get a little soil activity if you do have the chlormequat in there, and you can use a higher rate, and it is safer than some of the other more active triazoles that we're going to talk about, and it has a lot of applications for perennials and annuals. So the medium rate, really, you're looking at diminizide around 1250 to 2500, and then trying to hold chlormequat under 1500 to avoid the phytotoxicity is a good combination that goes on. Here's some work Joyce also did, a single application of B9 in the middle, the tank mix is then on the right side, and you can see that increased growth control that's going on with that plant. The next one to look at is fluoroprimonol. The only one on the market right now is Top Floor from C-Pro, and it's a 0.38% solution, and it has a very wide assortment of plants that it's active on. Rates there are listed for sprays, drenches, and liner soaks, and it has really good activity at low rates as a drench. So it's a very cost-effective drench option if that's what you're looking for to control plant growth. And the spectrum, when you're looking at leaf activity for primidol, I would consider it closer to paclobutrazole. When it comes to activity as a drench, I would consider rates closer to a uniconazole when you're looking at relative activity for that particular chemical. So it does have activity or uptake from the leaf, stem, and roots. Now it doesn't translocate out of the leaf to another growing point as much, but it does with any application. With the volume we're using, we're giving enough volume of water, you'll get some hitting the soil or the stem, and that's where a lot of the activity of the triazoles actually come from. Now, it also would prefer 4 hours of time for uptake to enhance the growth effects like the other PGRs. So here you can see some results. We have the top one, untreated control, Top Floor at 20 and 30, and then a comparison of the untreated control, Top Floor at 20, 30, Bonsai at 35, and then the SUMagic rate there at 10 part per million. Same thing on some trials we did on pot moms. It was comparison of once and twice with 25 part per million. The second application twice, that's 50 part per million is a little high, but at 25 things look quite nice as a foliar spray with Duluth mom. Here is the substrate drench work. It's the same study I showed earlier, but the point here is if you're going to do a drench, you get good control with the drench with both SUMagic and Top Floor, but cost-wise, because of the activity that's there, it's a more economical option for using Top Floor. So keys to use, it's a great chemical to use when you're wanting to have growth control with a substrate drench. It's cost effective. It has similar efficacy as a Paclo that you need to consider if you're using it for foliar spray, and more of a SUMagic type, a uniconazole type for a drench. And in most studies, we see limited delay on flowering, even at higher rates. So the next one we want to look at is probably the workhorse that we see with PGRs, at least in the U.S., especially in the southern U.S., is paclobutrazol. A lot of products on there. The original Bonsai with Syngenta. OHP has their Paczol. Fine has Piccolo, and then the 10X, the more concentrated one, and there's a drench option with downsize from Greenleaf. So a number of products that are on there. With more products in the marketplace, there has been more downward trend on pricing of this. So it was always one of the primary PGRs, but it's also probably come to being a little more cost effective also with the price pressure that went on it. So that's why by far it's the, I would call it the one of choice for most applications. So paclobutrazol, it's a triazole. So it was in a fungicide trial. It was then labeled in the 80s and registered in the 85. And really, if you look at it, the work that was done by Uniroyal really brought that to the forefront. But it was a nice chemical. It was the most potent chemical we had at that point, and so there was a need for it. And so, as you can see, that after that need was established, it's continued the last few years with the use of that chemical. So it has stem and root activity. It does have some leaf activity, but it doesn't translocate out. Poinsettias, bedding plants, perennials are key crops, and late drenches at low doses. The good work that was done down in Florida with Jim Barrett, it's a very good application. So foliar spray rates, it varies. We have the PGR guide up on the website that you can pull down, or it might have come out on your Grower Talk magazine mailing if you've received it this month. So the rates are there, and then the drenches you can use very low dose drenches, ultra low, 0.1, and then growers, depending on the amount of growth control they want of holding a plant, many will use somewhere between 1/2 part per million and maybe all the way up to 5, but it's typically on the lower range of that rate range. So here's some examples of some work we did with Piccolo drenches. You can see as the rate increased, that you have smaller plants, more compact, and they look pretty good. Foliar sprays, the same situation here. So you get your growth control, the plants aren't as stretched. So that's what the goal is from using a PGR. And then looking at uniconazole. So the two main chemicals that are out there are Sumagic, which was initially introduced, Valent USA, and now New Farm with their marketing agreement, and Concise by Fine. It has a very high activity, so it is the most potent of the PGRs that are out there, and it's taken up a little by the leaves, but it's not translocated, but it's by far its activity is stem and roots. And so, but it's not labeled for chemigation. It is very soil active, and many times, especially with the work Joyce Latimer's seen, that as you increase the rate, you'll get smaller plants. It's a linear approach, and so oftentimes you might still get some saturation with some of the regular floriculture crops that, at X rate, you don't get any more control, but it's a very, if you have some tough crops that you can't control, uniconazole is something to consider for an application. So here's some work also on Rudbeckia from Joyce Latimer, sprays on the top, drenches on the bottom, and you can see the effects that are going on with those plants to get the effects of controlling that plant. Here's some concise work that was done here by Brian Krug when he was here as a grad student. So increasing the rate, you can control some of that stretch of hyacinths when you take them out of the cooler. So in summary, there's a number of chemicals that are out there. And so really, I refer to the blue box, the anti-GA ones that are there. Joyce is going to cover next the structural ones, the ones in purple at the bottom. So we're lucky that marketing-wise, by all these chemical companies, we have quite a few different options in the toolbox to increase growth, to change the structure, to control growth for any of the plants that we have, so we can customize it to make it work in our greenhouse and then also for the consumer. So with that, I'll open it up for questions. So Brian?
All right, thank you, Brian. We do have a couple of questions so far. So the first one is, when spraying a rest, is it desirable to have a higher humidity when you spray it?
So the question is the amount of humidity. Well, if you have a higher humidity in the greenhouse, you're going to have a slower drying rate. So you're going to then enhance the ability of that leaf to take up that chemical. So yes, a higher humidity is better. And typically in the morning, after overnight, you're not ventilating as much. You're going to have a higher humidity in the morning than at the heat of the day. So yes, I mean, in fact, and I don't have the slides in the presentation, but we did some re-wetting work on, and we picked top floor that we applied it, and we re-wet the leaves the next day. And I'm not talking, we didn't water them down. We misted them slightly. We got about 15% additional growth control just because we re-wetted it. So what we did effectively was re-wet it, and the leaves were able to absorb more of the chemical. So yes, high humidity is beneficial.
And that's for any PGR, not as a foliar spray, not just a rest, correct?
It is valid for any of the anti-GA PGRs I covered here. Yes, okay. Because they all have leaf uptake. Probably a little less for B9 just because it's more active, but it still would definitely benefit it in those cases.
Okay. This question might be one that will be covered in coming up presentations. But the question is there any research on using top floor G, or the granular form of top floor, on perennials?
I don't know. The next speaker is the perennial expert, so I will let her talk about it. We have not, we don't do perennial research. That Joyce Latimer does most of that, and so I have not used it, and I'm not familiar with that. So Joyce will come up next. So if she doesn't get it answered, please post it again. So she's the next speaker.
Okay. Are there any other questions out there that people want to type in quick? That's all that I have so far on that people have posted. So if I don't hear any other questions here in the next just couple seconds, we'll take a break again, and we'll come back here just before 12 o'clock, and Joyce Latimer from Virginia Tech will take over. I've got a couple more questions.
Okay.
Let's see. If a misapplication of bonsai was done, how long do you have till it is before the uptake happens in the plant? So I'm assuming that the grower is thinking maybe we applied it too heavy, we realized it. Can we leach it out of the substrate?
Of course, we would like to have a longer period of time to help on the absorption of that PGR through the leaves, that 4 hours. But the volume of water that we use, basically a half a gallon per 100 square feet, is sufficient volume that we are counting on that additional chemical to run down the stem and have contact for uptake and get some in the soil for uptake. Those two are usually there, and the uptake is very quick. From my conversations with some of the chemical people, it's pretty difficult to flush that out with an overdose. Now, the answer many times for overcoming that, and there's a label for that, is both fresco and fascination, that you can use low doses. Typically, people start with a low dose of about 1 or 2 parts per million, maybe 3. Apply it, see if you have the growth response, and if you need to, you can reapply it. Now, just so you know, you got the brake on there because of the PGR overdose, the anti-GA PGR overdose, and you're like tapping the gas with this GABA product. And there's a point that if you apply it too high or too often, you can effectively be pushing down on that accelerator and it can shoot off on you. So then what do you have to do? You have to come back with another anti-GA PGR. So there's a balance there. Now down that line with the research reports that we posted on Wednesday, so at the e-GRO.org website under research tab, I have a video there looking at PGR overdoses, but from the standpoint through recirculating water with low dose paclobutrazol rates. So it's like a 2-minute video if you want to watch it.
Okay. A question about the rates on the guide, the PGR guide. Are those North Carolina rates?
So if you look at the PGR guide, and I can't reach over and get it, but we color coordinated that. And so there are blocks, and it's divided between among label rates is one color block. Another one is research rates. I think that's green if I'm not mistaken. And then finally, grower and or supplier rates. So, you know, there was some good information in a magazine. I wanted to include that crop. So if it's a research rate, I think I've taken care of it. I have listed which university did the work. You know, Purdue, Michigan State, Virginia Tech, NC State. So then you can judge that rate and make your adjustments. For the most part, you'd use about half those rates the further north you go on the NC State rates, and you'd use higher rates, let's say south of Gainesville, up to 2x when you get further south. So you got to make some of those adjustments on the PGR rates.
All right, that's where the art of PGRs collides with the science.
Yes, very much so. And besides the cultivar variation, the species variation, the weather conditions, all those things, yes.
A quick question of what was the PGR that was sprayed on the picture that you had of the Sempervirens hens and chicks?
That is Colate, the GA product. I believe the PGR or the Colate use guide is still available from the Fine website. And there is a small section that is in there. So if you can go to the Fine America's website, you can download that guide, and there's a summary there. We're looking at primarily 200 being the optimal rate. Some need a little higher, some a little lower. And as a quick and dirty summary, last year actually I posted a video on the e-GRO.org web YouTube channel, and there's a short video there. If you go down a little further, and you can see a summary of rates. So it was Colate that was used.
Okay. One very quick question, if you can answer it in just a few seconds, Brian. Does media pH affect the efficacy of PGRs?
Yes, and Joyce is talking about that in the last presentation.
Fantastic. All right. We'll take a very short break. We'll come back here in about 3 minutes, and Joyce Latimer from Virginia Tech will continue our webinar with branching agents. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.